I'm your host, Pastor Plek, and joining me in studio, none other than Eric Creekmore, who is the executive director of the Association of Hill Country Churches, really church planting network.
Love it.
Yeah. So Eric, thanks for being on.
Yeah, dude. Good to see you, man.
And
good to be back.
Yeah, on the official Pastor Plek podcast. Pastor Plek's podcast, after you were on, just took like meteoric rise in downloads.
You might want to, yeah.
We went from dozens to scores. Anyway, so
lots.
Lots. So, but let's talk church planting, and let's talk about what you do specifically in your role and how it shifted from your role as an executive pastor at Hill Country Bible Church, or is it still that?
Yeah, it's multifaceted.
What exactly is it you do around here?
Great question. I wish I knew. So back in June, began the transition from what I was doing at Hill Country Austin to take over leadership for our association, our network of churches in Greater Austin that is still arm in arm trying to multiply churches to reduce lostness, saturate the city with the gospel. Back at Hill Country, I'm technically the church planting director, so obviously we were laughing about Venn diagrams earlier in our conversation, our pre-recording conversation, and so obviously overlap there. Right. But instead of working on helping to see one local church have that be just a regular part of their ministry, raising up, launching church planters, is like, okay, how do I help all the churches across our network to be effective in that regard? Like, that's at the end of the day, that's what my role is supposed to do, right? Healthy reproduction. So make sure that our churches, lead pastors, elder boards are healthy, because we don't want to reproduce unhealth, obviously, but they're healthy but reproducing. Right. And so, on the HCBC side, stay on the preaching team and continue to do that, and then more and more of this next year transition fully into the association role. Okay, so let's talk through really what the association is all about, because I know that at least people at Wells Branch Community Church and beyond know that we're a part of an association, but what exactly does that association do? It helps catalyze church planting, obviously, but how do we do that? Yeah, several things. One is when you think about the process of planting a church, there's getting your church ready to plant, everything from elder board alignment, staff alignment, church vision casting, to the basics, nuts and bolts of resourcing. Like, man, if we're going to plant a church, we're going to have to give some budget to that, going to have to give some staff time, the lead pastor is going to have to give time to it, and just figuring out those nuts and bolts, and then helping to recruit church planters, whether it is an internal development process, like you got a great young guy that you've developed and discipled through the years, you've seen him grow and cast vision for that, man, could you be a church planter, and seeing that individual eventually plant, or on the external side. And that's where there's a good blend between the member church, like a Wells Branch, and the network, because it's easier for the network to be that front door, and to be out, like stirring up conversations at conferences or in different places where you might find planters, seminaries, Bible colleges, that sort of thing, to cast that vision, to say, hey, God is bringing a lot of people to Austin, to include Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, and obviously we've had McConaughey here for years, but a whole mess of people. Like, this isn't Detroit or a San Francisco, where people are like leaving. Yeah, the population is genuinely decreasing significantly year over year. It's not here. Right. And so having a heart for, and what we believe is God's heart, right? When you read the book of Acts, you see that the church multiplied as it began to spread from Jerusalem into Judea and Samaria and beyond. And the way, it's interesting, the way Luke writes it, he writes it just matter of fact. Yeah. Right? The church was growing, it was strong, and it multiplied. Right. And he plants these little kind of markers along the way in the narrative. And it's like just normal. Yeah. Like, oh, yeah, what'd you do this? Yeah, we planted another church. Yeah, we multiplied disciples over here and started church, had to appoint elders. Yeah. Like, okay, if that's the early church, right? And here we are now back full circle into Austin, a growing area. Isn't that still God's heart?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then wouldn't it not make sense that he is still building his church in similar ways, right? And principle-wise as a multiplicative engine, and then just to continue, like, okay, the association then helps with every October we run a planning conference, bring guys in from all over the city to stir up not only those guys who may be called, but also those churches be like, man, how do we get in the game?
Yeah.
Right. We've stalled out, man. We've gotten in the tyranny of the urgent that every elder board, lead pastor, staff fights against. Like this thing popped up this week, this thing popped up the following week, and being able to wrestle your time and energy and leadership bandwidth away from those kinds of things into like, okay, we still have to be making disciples, sharing the gospel, and multiplying churches.
Okay, so let's talk about, I think, the necessary ingredient. Mm-hmm. And I would say 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, mm-hmm. we were crushing it.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
On church planting.
Yeah, 100%.
And there were church planters were everywhere. Like everywhere you look, there's a church planter. I remember 100%. Being in Austin at the time. Every person I met was like, "I just want to plant churches in Austin."
Right.
And it was like weird. And I was like, "Okay." And I was like, "I guess it fits for the city." And and I was like, I remember I met with Lazarus Brewing Company.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I met with that guy back in like 2012, 2013.
Right.
And this guy goes, "Yeah, I'm going to plant a church, but the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to start a brewery." And Holland and I met with him on the east side, and we're just like,
that's one way.
Buckaroo. And he did it. He did it. Now, I don't know if he actually has a church, but he's got 2 locations for breweries. And I think he's got a couple house churches that meet like on
kind of use the space or whatever.
Space.
Yeah.
But it was like everything was imaginable. Everything was happening. That was at the tail end of it.
Right.
Of that period of time.
Right.
But it feels like the church planter vineyard is in a dry season.
Yep.
And you were remarking like at the Houston Church Planting Network.
Right.
They said something. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So our brothers over in Houston, Chad Clarkson, Bruce Wesley, and the HCPN guys, they had their August kick back off, right? Meeting, gathering everyone in the city to get back after church planting after the summer, as we're all, getting into that back in the ministry season mode. And I was watching the recording of the meeting because we love those guys, learn from those guys. And Bruce Wesley, he made a comment that I just like, yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing here in Austin and what you just articulated. He made the comment is like the church planter pipeline is like the Ezekiel Valley of dry bones. And what was, to your point, you call it, from 2000 to 2012, just to put some years to it. Yeah. You're right. It was the thing to do. It was sexy. It was the heyday of Driscoll X29, Matt Chandler.
Everybody functional was planting churches.
100%.
And I think so. I think we saw towards the end of the teens that church planting kind of fell out of vogue, and then 2020 slammed it shut.
Yeah, agreed.
And church plants are closing left and right, because our culture had to shift.
Yeah,
and this is I would love to hear your observation, just because I'm going to give you mine.
Yeah.
So pre-COVID, we were as a church. And I don't think I realized how spread across the political spectrum we were.
Yeah, right.
But in 2020, we were just as red as we were blue. Right. I think. 2020 happens. Our church decides, I guess we took a crazy conservative right-wing stance in that we went with, we're going to meet and masks are optional. All right. So when we said we're meeting and masks are optional, everybody on the blue side of the aisle they were gone.
Right.
And so then all of a sudden our church had to restart with about, there were some that were just, they just weren't around. Mm-hmm. But we went from an average of adults of 330 to, we started again back in person. We had like 65, and then slowly over time. And now we're about 250, 260 adults. And I'm not including kids back then when we were 330 plus kids. So whatever that was. Right. But 250 adults now plus children. It was kind of wild to see we had to grow from almost half of the, I don't know what the right word for that is. It's as if because we made the choice of we are non-mask or mask optional,
Right.
we're meeting in person, it cut off a whole segment of the population.
Without a doubt.
And they didn't come back. And I don't know if they're going anywhere, but they definitely didn't come back to our church.
Right.
And I think because we are maybe a little bit more on the conservative side in the sense that we are complementarian and we're unashamed about that. We have male elders and male pastors or whatever.
Right.
That became a
Right.
In the DEI world of all that, where we're pretty diverse as a congregation, but in that sense, a lot of people checked out. So I thought that was kind of wild. I just want to see if was at Hill Country, if you guys experienced something similar.
Yeah. So the dynamics were exactly the same, depending on what your political leanings were. Either they aligned with the decisions the church was making, and you were like, great, my church is doing what I think they should be doing.
Right.
Or they did not align. Notice, not scripturally,
Right.
politically.
Right.
Right. And because of the political difference, to your point, the same thing happened at Hill Country to a larger degree, where they chose differently. Now, the question is why?
Yeah.
And I'm not smart enough to think through these categories, so I'm basically going to quote things I've heard Ed Stetzer say, because he's like the master researcher and all that in evangelicalism. And what he has written on, and so if you Google Ed Stetzer and some of these terms that I'll use here in a second, you'll find his articles. And so I'm just leveraging his work. So that's my footnote. What he said is you can break American Christianity and really American people into four groups, right? The first group is convictional Christians. And those are people who love Jesus, read the Bible. They are not just giving lip service to their faith, but they are convinced of who Jesus is, what it means for their life. And about 25% of the country, give or take, is convictionally Christian. The next 25% is congregational Christians. These are the folks who, hey, they come on Christmas, they come on Easter. If you were to go to their house right now, knock on their door, be like, hey, do you guys go to church? Yeah. What church you go to? Oh, I go to Wells Branch. When was the last time you've been there? And they're like,
Right.
And they would struggle to tell you outside of, oh, we're there last Easter or whatever. They are in the congregation at some level.
Right.
But is Jesus really Lord of their life?
Right.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not.
Right. And then there's another group, another 25% that is culturally Christian.
Right.
And this is really the Achilles heel of the Bible Belt and Texas, which is largely this idea that, hey, I'm American. I'm not a Muslim, atheist, Buddhist. So I guess I'm Christian.
Right.
Right. And again, you'd ask that group of people like, okay, so tell me how that works out in your life. Well, I try to be nice to people. Right. And you would be hard pressed to find any scriptural biblical foundation for a genuine faith. Right. Right. And that's 75%, right? So what's the other 25%? And this is the growing population. This is the rise of the nuns. This is people who, and this is what I think has happened culturally and what happened in particular in 2020, is it no longer served you to be one of those first three groups. The convictional Christians stayed there.
Yeah, nothing changed.
But those middle two groups didn't slide into the convictional. They slid down into the nuns. They're like, it doesn't really help you. You know what? I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
Right. And now it's just more acceptable to be like, nope, I don't believe that. And not only that, it's even turning a little more militant in that, and that's wrong.
Right.
If you believe those archaic, like,
Draconian.
oh, there's two genders and all the hot button issues, right? Right to life, all those things. And so what has happened is the growth has come from those folks just naming what has already been happening.
Right.
Right. And that's like, yeah, I don't believe it. And so I will instead of like play this game where it's like, yeah, I'll say I'm Christian, but you're really not, and you don't really know that, so you take them at their word. But then if you look underneath, it's like they're not, like they were always there, right? They're just sorting themselves out, and this is why Stetzer calls it the great sort. What happened in those churches is those people who were nominally Christian just gave it up.
Right.
They weren't actually with you. They weren't actually following Jesus. But for whatever reason, it's what their parents did. It's like, hey, I got this Sunday routine, and that's no longer the case, and so they're gone.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's challenging because I think for a lot of churches, the people that you were trying to reach were in your own church.
That's right.
And to a large, and to be fair, like our elders and I just kind of randomly went and did a count of all the people we knew that don't know Jesus at our church, and about 10% of our Sunday population is not saved.
Right.
Any given Sunday, we know who they are.
Right.
They know who they are, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, and they're coming.
And they know that, and they keep coming. And I get to preach the gospel to that 10% every single week. And I make sure to kind of have hey, here's an opportunity for you to respond. Right. Text Jesus to the number on the screen, kind of a thing.
Right.
And that's been a real blessing. And continually, I think the ministry year 22, 23, we saw 40 people get baptized at our church.
That's
23
awesome.
to 24, we saw 20. This year we're starting off with a little bit more oomph. We've had 7 so far, and August was our beginning of the year. So since August 1,
awesome.
7. And so and I think we'll have like another 5 in the queue. So what that means is that we're still having people come to Christ,
right?
Which is great. In fact, one of our biggest stats was I think we had 25 new members or 30 new members of the year, and 6 of those were
new believers
baptized at our church.
Yeah,
and that's a huge,
huge.
Like usually, what was it? 10%. It's what you're sort of going for. Is your
conversion rate.
Yeah, so like you're supposed to get 3 usually, and so we kind of double that, which is amazing.
Right.
But we're still at what I'm seeing here overall is we're still trying to recover whatever it was we lost people-wise. The convicted Christians are doubling down, I think, because the culture is so anti-Christian.
Yeah, biblical values.
And so they are like, this is my life, digging in, which it's been really cool to see a lot of our church, people that were maybe in the past a little bit less vocal about their faith, are now digging in. So I think to your point,
100%.
the convicted Christians are like hardcore.
100%.
And I think the cultural Christians has fallen off, and they don't care.
No, they don't. They're just really naming what was true already, and it just became more clear through COVID, and again, them feeling freer to be like, yeah, this is who I am, and I'm out.
So one of the things I've noticed over the past post-COVID is, and this is sort of what I've sort of seen, is that smaller churches that got hit have died.
Yeah.
I just know 2 churches in Round Rock.
Yeah, there's actually like 3 or 4.
Yeah, 3 or 4. So like 3 or 4 in Round Rock.
Yeah, in the past month and a half.
Yeah, past month and a half, 3 or 4 churches gone. Like the Exchange Church, which was just up the road here, great church, more of a charismatic stream. But great. And they were about 250, 300 before COVID.
Wow.
And then COVID smashed them. And I don't know all the details of it.
Sure.
But they folded, and they sent all their people to Shoreline. And Shoreline, they love Jesus. And that's their stream.
Right.
And so that fit. And I was sitting there going like there was enough people there to kind of continue to do a church. But you know what there wasn't? A leader.
Right.
And I think that's what we're, to the point of the church planting pipeline.
Yep.
There is a vacuum of leaders, even coming out of seminary. I think you and I mentioned this like several years ago. Like I think Aubrey Malfers had at Dallas Seminary had a whole like slew of people in the 2000s into the teens, and now that's sort of dried up. And I think the entrepreneurial Christians that are maybe wanting to go be a pastor or called they're not. I think they're like thinking twice about church planning.
Without a doubt.
Let's go to an established place that can pay my salary, because I've seen the battlefield and the
carnage.
The carnage of church planners everywhere. Their families are destroyed. The churches died, and that can't be what God has for us.
Yeah. Why would I sign up?
Why would I sign up for that?
Right.
And I think in the association, I think we've been hit, like everybody else. But God, and this is the part where like God likes us more. I just know, it's like you only know what you know because that's your sphere of influence.
Right.
But like through COVID, Midtown Church, led by Jake Box downtown by the campus, got a building that they're no longer in a school. They have a permanent facility there at 45th and Red River. And that's huge.
Yeah.
I think Hutto was like got land and $1 million to build a building, and they're almost done with their building. Northway built their building. Redemption City got land. I think Crossroads is almost there on there. But we're moving like I saw a lot of movement within our association of God moving the gospel forward in spite of whatever you want to call it, the COVID lack.
Right.
What would you say that's, I don't know if we can put a reason on it, but just if you've noticed that, and then have you seen that, maybe you have eyes that are beyond the horizon of just the association. So you're, with Houston or whatever. Have you seen anything similar to that anywhere else? Yeah.
So obviously the asteroid strike that was COVID and obliterating churches is a real thing. And even to what you were saying, the 4 churches that we know of in our neck of the woods that are closing or have closed recently, the reverberations are still happening. Yeah. So we in the association have not seen that. And the question, okay, well, what's different? And what I keep running into is relationships. Right. So Jesus sent them out 2 by 2. Right? When every pastor of any church nowadays stands up every fall and we launch our small groups, what the pastor will say in some regard is, hey, everyone in my church, just so you know, this whole Christian thing, you can't do it on your own. Your faith is personal to you. You have to have a personal relationship with Jesus, but your faith is never private. You actually can't grow fully in Jesus by yourself. You need your brothers and sisters. We have been put into a family. We are one in the Spirit, right? The dividing wall has been taken down, Ephesians, and we're now one. We're made one in Jesus. So again, we would say, like, you have to be in a small group. Okay, totally believe that. So wouldn't it make sense that applies to the pastor too?
Right.
And so what we have seen, and this is absolutely God's grace, that because through COVID, we, by the Spirit's leading, doubled down on the relational side. Yeah. That the pastors in our network truly growing together as a group of guys, a group of brothers who are fighting the fight in our little pockets, around the city, but gathering monthly, getting away in a retreat once a year, grabbing our wives and having us as couples together. It is the bulwark against the pressure that guys feel when the enemy comes at them and all the different things to where, and we do not cast one stone at any brother who is like, man, I got to take a break and step away. Right. Praise God for you and the time that you gave to it. And God's not done with you. Right. However, our hope is the health of that individual, their family, their marriage, and the church for a long, long time. And so then what it comes back down to is, okay, who do you have, pastor, in your life that really knows? So like when you and I grab lunch before we record this, man, we're talking about stuff in ways that we can't talk about in a lot of different, because we know. Yeah. We know what it's like when we get that email, when we're trying to preach hard stuff and, some people are like, yeah, and most people are like, what? Yeah. And everything in between. And so having a network of brothers that you are legitimately relationally connected with, like your friends.
Yeah, I think this is important because I think a lot of pastors feel like maybe when you go down that dark path of isolation as a pastor, it's like you're having issues at your church and you think I'm the only one that's having issues at my church. So you pastored for 7 years, you planted a church, pastored for 7 years, and then you took a sabbatical, and then you ended up at Hill Country Bible Church as an executive pastor. Talk to me about that transition and just some of the beatings you took as a lead pastor that, man, I don't know if it would have made a difference, or God's calling us sovereign and all that, but what difference would have made if you had a church plant network like this?
Oh my gosh. Well, like we were we were at the point where it's like, man, we're at 150 people. Yep. We're looking to buy land. Yep. It's like it's about to take that next step, right? In the growth curve or whatever. People getting baptized, right? A lot of good stuff. And then the enemy sowed seeds of discord.
Talk to me what kind, like, talk to me, like, what were the seeds of discord? Because I think I've experienced that.
Totally.
So how does the enemy? Yeah. Obviously, our battle isn't against flesh and blood, right? It's against the spiritual forces of darkness. Right. But what kind? And you don't need to go into details. But what was the situation like when enemy started sowing seeds of discord?
Yeah. So as you grow, one of the things you have to do is reimagine and shift people's roles and responsibilities, right? Yep. So the way you do, say, men's ministry or women's ministry when you're a church of 70 is different than how you lead that ministry when you're 150.
Exactly.
Okay. So you have a leader, and this is what happened with me, who was leading one of those ministries, and we were having conversations about how that leader needed to change because the ministry grew from what it used to be, and you can't do the same things.
What got you here won't get you there.
100%. Well, what happened, and this is what the enemy sowed in, is that person interpreted what I was doing as getting rid of them. Versus what I was trying to do, which is like, no, let's grow into, here's the new job description, right? And here's how you need to grow into this, and we're going to work together. And they didn't believe that.
And like, this is where people go, like, you clearly have a power agenda, and it's you must be, you're from the military, and so of course you've got all these issues that you probably are meeting out, and your control issues. And I think that's where people go, because they, you can probably look at they were not parented well, or it could be just Satan's ability to get in between you and another brother in Christ, which is why reconciliation of relationships becomes pivotal.
Right.
And man, that's so hard, because I think I've experienced that.
Totally.
And people all over the place experience, well, all of a sudden the person that you're trying to love on and support is one that feels like you're against them. And you're like, what?
No, that's not happening.
Like, why did I didn't sign up to be in control of small groups or men's ministry. I signed up to be kind of part of the, anyway.
Right.
So speak to the pastor, church or potential church planner, or someone's been burned, for, whether it was their own self-inflicted wound or they truly got just crushed. Why be a part of an association?
Yeah. Everyone will experience what Jesus experienced.
Oh, nice.
In this regard, right? So you remember the passage where Jesus, as he was often doing, delivering hard truth.
Yeah.
And at one point, I can't remember where it is exactly, Matthew, Luke, a whole bunch of people are like, that's it, we're out.
Yeah, John 6, do you want to leave too?
And Jesus turns to the disciples and says, do you want to leave too? And then Peter, who we all love, every pastor is going to hug Peter for a long time and say, I'm just like you. Thank you for being honest. He's like, where else are we going to go?
Yeah.
Right? But in our humanity, if we're that pastor and we're left with 12 after we had grown it to who knows how many people were
Thousands,
there. Let's call it 200. Right. In addition, Jesus will preach to thousands, and he knows they're here for the food and to get a miracle.
Right.
They don't want to change. They don't want to.
They're getting their felt needs met.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Anyway.
And to your question, absent another group of guys who are like, oh yeah, me too, what you will think is, and what the enemy will whisper in your ear is, it's because you're not a good pastor. It's because you stink. It's because God is not with you. That's why you're having these challenges. But you need a bunch of other brothers to hear your story and go, oh no, brother, me too.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I deal with. And then you could all go, and literally, like we do, like laugh about it and then carry on.
Yeah. Because I think what you would say now, just at least I would say this, is that, I didn't quit a whole bunch of times.
Oh, that's it. How are you still in ministry?
I didn't quit. That's
because
it.
I didn't quit.
Yeah. And I think you get to that place sometimes as a pastor where you're just like, the beatings will continue until morale improves. And it's just hard to press forward when everybody wants to critique and how was God leading you and whatever. And you're like, I wasn't thinking about whatever that thing was. I was thinking about this other thing that God's leading me to. Right. And now I'm distracted from the thing that the Lord's calling me to because I'm dealing with this thing of it. It's hard. And I think what's encouraging for me, and I think this is why pastors need pastors, is the Apostle Paul was not immune to this.
No.
Like, he's got, and Demas, who was in love with the world, left us. And you're like, oh, man. Like, for Paul to write that in a letter, that must have been a heart-wrenching, gut-spilling, like, you're just in this for you, Paul. You just want to control us all. And you're like, man, if the guy who wrote half of the New Testament struggled with people rejecting him, and the guy is getting martyred for his faith, and he still has people like not happy with him. What that means, Pastor, is that pretty much if the guys in the Bible didn't have people that were happy with him, if Jesus, who was the ultimate perfect shepherd, still had people that wanted to crucify him, then of course you're going to have to deal with that. And so I think that's the part of just standing firm in the calling that God has for you. And so I think that's also why it's so important to have a network of pastors, as you said, as well as your elder board. But, that becomes, we're in our association, we believe in a plurality of elders, which is really helpful. But still, there's still a lot of weight that a lead pastor carries.
You need both and. Yeah. You need buddies that you're arm in arm with in your local church that are your fellow elders, but you also need a group of guys who are other lead pastors in other places who you can fully vent and not, check what you're saying, but just vomit what you need to vomit.
Right. Okay, so let's talk through where the association is going forward. I think we're planting an actual charter service is happening this
launch Sunday.
September
15th.
For
Valle Community Church, east side of the city.
Manor-ish area? Yeah. Manor ISD at least, right?
Yep.
It's Austin. Is it technically Austin?
Yeah, technically Austin.
I think it's as east in Austin as Wells Branch is north in Austin.
Right, and still be in the city.
Yeah. And so like they're probably like their school is Manor, like our school is Round Rock, that kind of thing. Okay, that's cool. And Travis DeLuna is the lead pastor there, being planted out of the Well Community Church,
correct,
in East Austin. So that's super exciting.
Yeah. It's the 42nd church that God in his grace has seen fit to allow us to partner together to plan.
Like, that's exciting. Yeah. Like I think when the years where we had like 5 or 6 churches going out the door, different than the years where it's like one every other year or so. Yeah. And so we need to really celebrate this. When we sent, Taylor Bible Church, was being pastored by James Foster, who we sent after being 10 years here. And he came and preached for us not too long ago. I invited him to come this Sunday because it's our 15th birthday. Pretty excited about that. And we're going to be talking about all the things. But anyway, it's so important, I think, to celebrate victories and see the gospel still continue to go forward. Because I think sometimes you can get caught up in the frustration of things not going well. Because we've planted 42. There are, 30 left? That's why it's hard, right?
Right, yeah. We've planted 42 over the past, call it 30 years. Yeah. And of those 42, 8 have closed or merged with other network churches. 6 of them are still in existence, doing great work.
Outside the association,
but not arm in arm as a part of the network anymore. And 26 churches are still...
Way to go.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's so really exciting and wild to sort of wrap your head around. Is like this, it's not like you come to, but 26, let's just call it 26 out of 42, but then really 32 out of 42. So we're at like a 75% success rate. Right. And I think this is a stat I'd love to see if this is like put Eric on the spot. But what is the failure rate of church plants?
Historically, it's been around 60 to 70%.
So when our success rate is really 60 to 70%, it's the complete opposite.
Yeah, it's statistically an anomaly.
Yeah. And so that's amazing.
It is
and
God's
the fact
grace.
that it's not like we planted churches 20 years ago and we haven't planted since. It's like we have a church going out this Sunday. Last year in October, James Foster went out the door. And
We've planted 3 in the past 2 years.
Right.
With another one in the hopper, hopefully in January. So by God's grace, we're still getting it.
We're still getting it done. Because Mason, when did he plant Gerald?
Easter.
So yeah, so I think that's, so Gerald Community Church, Valle, is it Community Church?
Yep.
Valle Community Church, Taylor Bible Church. It's exciting to see all these pastors
without a doubt.
and churches go out the door, living the calling, even when we are in a season of, it's been a struggle to find.
It's not getting easier.
So like when we were looking for a student pastor, and this was just not like church planner, and not like, church planners are superheroes, but they sort of are, because they've got to have an entrepreneurial bent. They have to kind of be a little bit in real estate, a little bit in marketing, a little bit in
leadership and administration. Yeah,
You've
all
got
the
to have
things.
everything.
Yeah.
But we were looking for a student pastor, somebody that could work with kids, and it took us a year.
Yeah.
To find our guy. And that to me was wild, that there wasn't when I asked Dallas Seminary for resumes, I got 0. I had to call Dallas Seminary and say, like, we're in Austin.
No, seriously, you're a whole seminary. Why don't you send me a couple?
Yeah. And they're like, oh, we didn't? And I'm like, and then they sent me like 3 that were like at the bottom. I don't know. I guess they went around saying, do you have any resumes around here? And I was sitting there going like, oh man. And God bless them. I'm sure they're going to do great ministry, but they never had a quiet time. They had never shared the gospel. I was like, these people, I don't know if would be members at my church, let alone a pastor at my church. And I was like, I thought that was sort of wild.
Right.
And so the fact that even, we're still raising up leaders, we're still calling people to go. And so there's a real need.
Right.
And so what that means is, if you're out there listening to this,
totally,
and you've got some competence and capacity and character, it might be time for you to hear God's calling to come plant a church with us.
Right. Well, what I think is super encouraging is in 1 Timothy 3, right? In that section that's going to talk about the biblical qualifications for an elder, and then it moves into deacon.
Yeah.
Paul starts that section saying, he who desires to be an overseer, it's a noble work.
Yeah.
They desire a noble work. And so for those guys that are out there that are right now wrestling with, could I, should I, could God be calling me to that? Man, if you desire to do a noble work, if you desire to lay your life down for the gospel, right, which is, oh, by the way, the call of a disciple, right, to count the cost and carry your cross. If that's you, even an inkling of that, even if right now as we're talking, that is sparking a little something, like you feel like, I don't know if it's me, I don't know if it's a Holy Spirit, like we want to have a conversation. Because we have, like we said, 26 churches that are right now looking for church planting residents to come in, learn culture and DNA, some ministry skills to help fill out what may not already be built, and then to see them developed into church planters, right? The historical reality for the past 2,000 years have been making disciples who make disciples, and out of that harvest you see elders and missionaries and deacons and church planters. And so for those who are right now wondering, like, could that be me? Man, assume the answer is yes until you get evidence to the contrary.
Right.
Because we are looking for men who have the call, but also enough spiritual courage to say, maybe me.
Yeah. I do think that there is the spiritual courage, especially post-COVID, has been lacking. And of
understandably.
Course, like, it was a beating. And maybe you were on staff somewhere, or maybe you were a part of a church somewhere, and you just saw the licking that the pastor took, or you were the pastor that took a licking, and you're like, I'm out. I get it. And I think we all needed each other during that time to kind of just go, I can't believe the amount of angst I've gotten over the decision for us to not wear masks, have an event, not have an event.
Right.
When everything you did was highly criticized, it just crushed the soul.
It did.
And so that's why I think one of the things, long suffering. If that's in your spiritual gift, gifting, long suffering, then you might be called to be a church planter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on church planting as a whole?
The big thing right now is continuing to be about it, right? The natural pull within the local church is not to multiply. It's to make sure that local church is running well, humming, the kids ministry, student ministry, the Sunday by Sunday-ness of things is going well.
Right.
Is there anything wrong with that? No.
Right.
The problem is it's inadequate, because you can have the best local church, but if you are not multiplying, right, something's missing.
Right.
If the natural state of the believer is to be a multiplying entity, right? If you abide in me, you will bear much fruit. Why? Verse 8 of John 15, to the glory of the Father, right? So if that's true of the individual believer and you have a church full of those people, it makes sense, now coming full circle, what we read in the book of Acts. And the church multiplied. And the church multiplied, right? But that's not the natural state. The natural state is just to run the church ministry by ministry, week by week, year by year, and not multiply, right? So you need to have, whether it is like for us, our network, our association of guys, where we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about multiplication. We're going to talk about what you need to plant a church, get a resident, all those things, because someone has to keep it in front of us. Otherwise, no one drifts into church planting, just like no one drifts into holiness, right? It is an intentional, proactive, get after it type of reality.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we talked about, many moons ago, and I don't know if the conversation really between you and me, but like over and over, like the standard for when a church becomes a sister church, and we got away from this, but it was like 200 people, and I am more convinced than ever that is essential. So I do think there is a place where getting your church to a functional place before, so that when COVID hits, you can withstand it.
Agreed.
Before you start planting. Otherwise, you're just the amount of weight that you're carrying, or if somebody dies, or there's some sort of scandal or whatever, to kind of take that hit as a sub 200 church. I think those sub 200 churches really struggle to recover after COVID.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Because we struggled after COVID, and like I said, we were 330 on a Sunday average, right? It was just like another Sunday. And now for us, 250 is a good Sunday of adults. And I think that's kind of a wild thought to kind of think the pre-COVID, post-COVID for the churches of our size. I do think that the mega churches saw, as churches collapsed, the smaller churches like, I am so done with small church. I'm going to go find the biggest church I can because this place is not going anywhere. And it was so hard. And so I think you see the mid-sized churches that really are going to have to kind of just keep grinding for that season to get over that hump where you're at a place of stability, not worrying about like year to year, are we going to make it? I think that's where a lot of churches that are sub 100 people, it's like, am I going to make it? And to get church planting in your head, when you might need to be thinking about just basic, don't think about developing church planters, think about developing elders. But really, the development of elders is the same thing you do for the development of church planters.
It is the seed bed.
And so I think that's the problem is for smaller churches, if you don't have a elder development process, then church planting will never be a part of your system.
It'll seem too far.
Because you'll have to get church planters from outside your church. And if you're not developing the engine of creating more elders, then what happens when you send out a bunch of people, you're going to be left with not a lot of leaders, and you have to start over. And so that's the part of really just understanding the reality of church planting and how hard it is if you're going to be involved in that. But honestly, it's what you need to be doing as a pastor to develop elders. So.
Amen.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the elder development piece is something that just as personally, I think, man, that we need to kind of think through that, because as a pastor, I'm like, I just want to reach more people for Jesus, which is great. That's addition.
Right.
Developing elders, that's the multiplication.
Yeah, it is like if I could sit down with every pastor, and I said this at our last meeting, and just to say it with this eye to eye with every pastor as a brother lovingly, is 2 Timothy 2:2 applies to every one of us. Right? Take what I've given you and train faithful men who can train others also. If you're listening to this and you're already a pastor, you're already in local church, just pray, God, who are the guys in my church right now that I can begin to meet with once a week for an hour and start to pour my life into? Just 1 hour in your schedule, right? And begin on the basis of 2 Timothy 2:2 to multiply yourself into the guys that God has already put you there, with an eye toward, and it's embedded in the verse, that they would then, absent you, be able to train others. Like awesome. That becomes the seedbed. Like, yes, like for so many, it's like, man, I can't plant. Like, that is so far away. We're 125 or 150. Right. But do what you can do now to set the DNA and the trajectory that one day.
But even if you never planted,
you still win.
And even if you never planted, you're still developing elders like God called you to
100%.
do. And I think I feel like the thing missing from the vocabulary of pastors right now is they see church planting like, nah, too hard. But when you dial it back of like, can I develop elders? You're never going to say that's too hard. You're saying that that's essential.
Right.
And so I think we need to go like the same thing that makes an elder, because remember when they went and appointed elders in different towns, they appointed church planters, right? Like
essentially.
Titus did with Crete.
Yeah.
And so you had to develop elders who had character, who had the ability to teach, who had basic doctrinal skills. And so I think that's the part where I think in all the things that pastors do, you know, a leader only does what only a leader can do. And so in those moments you go, what can I do? I think raise up the next batch of elders.
That's right.
And then after you've raised up enough elders, you're like, oh, hey, I could form an elder team to go and plant another church.
That's right.
And I think that might be the again, what size, whatever. I think that's the Holy Spirit discerned. But I think that's the part where I feel like guys that look at this obstacle of church planting that's so far out need to start with, like, what does God call me to do within my church context right now that ultimately one day might turn into that, and just have an eye for that as I'm developing elders.
Yep, totally agree.
All right. Well, hey, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions about church planting, you'd love to get with us. We'll bring Eric back because he knows things about church planting, and he would love to help you. In fact, we got 2 things coming up in October.
Right.
We have the Association of Hill Country Church. Is it
the Plant in Austin
Plant in Austin
conference?
Where at?
One-day conference, Parkway Bible Church, October 17th. Yep. 8:30 to 3 p.m. We have a track for churches that are interested in or kicking the tires on, could we be a church planting church? Another track for planters, whether you're, again, kicking the tires on that call, or like, you know, Jesus is calling you to that, or you're brand new to planting. We'll be able to resource you with kind of best practices and what you can think about and do to win where you're at right now in either case. So
let's talk about that. I think if you are a person who's thinking about planting, you really need to kind of get your heart set on that, be there. But then beyond that, we have a yearly assessment around the April timeframe.
Yeah, this coming year it'll be the first week of May.
Okay, first week of May. In May of 2025, we're gonna have an assessment. Let's say if someone's like they're listening in, I don't know, Maine or Boston or California or whatever. How do they get a hold of you to get involved in church planting?
Yeah. If you go to our post on churchstaffing.com, just type in church planter, church planting resident, our post will come up, and then you can contact us through there.
Or plantaustin.com.
Or plantaustin.com is the other place where there's a contact form, and we'll reach out, start the conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yep.
Hey, thanks for watching. We talk faith, culture, everything in between. If you want to get involved in church planting, let us know. You can text us at 737-231-0605, and I'll personally make sure that Eric comes back and brings more of that church planting wisdom to us here on Pastor Plek's podcast. So from our house to yours, have an awesome